I do the map, is it there? No, oh no, not that. It's the PDF. Yeah, excellent. All right. Welcome everyone to our third class of this semester, Humanities Destiny, in this compressed course. And we have with us two students in person today, two crewmates in our exploration of the human story on planet Earth as well. And I will get to that in a moment. I just want to make sure that for all the asynchronous students who are watching this, watching the recording, that we are fully connected, which we should be, and that the recording is looking good as well. And so I think we can say pretty convincingly that we have working tech in attendance. And that is the best news of all, that in any class that we do, it is technically sophisticated in this room. And I like to think of this as a kind of spacecraft. That's why behind me on the big board, we see the 4 astronauts who just recently returned from the moon, being interviewed by Adrienne Arsenault, the foreign correspondent for CBC National. And she's also the host of that show. And she recently interviewed the 4 astronauts, Jeremy Hansen, the Canadian, as well as the 3 Americans who were with him, the furthest that any humans have ever gone behind the moon. They just returned. And of course, you see the notes and you see the map of the world. And so let me just, before I get to Izzy and Carol and the others who may be joining us online, what I want to do today is give another lecture, but because we have Izzy in attendance and Carol is here as well to assist, we might be able to have the class a little more interactive, but we'll see how things go. If I recall correctly, in the first class we had this semester, Izzy joined us in the Cosmos online. So it's great that you can come and join us in person today as well. And so we'll see how things go in terms of how much interaction we want to have and how comfortable Izzy is in being in person here. But essentially, what I want to do today is look at another topic, of course, in our continuing exploration of the human story on planet Earth as we begin to leave Earth. And essentially, let me just show you here. I'll go to what you normally see on DC Connect, and you can see the essential rundown of all of the topics. And we've started to look at the future, history's lessons, the next big thing, which was last week, sustaining it together on Earth, science and religion. These are the topics that I'm exploring in terms of the human future this semester with you. Today, what I want to do is sort of look closely at this idea called sustaining it, or sustainability, or the sustainability of human civilization or human progress on planet Earth. And it's a natural sort of follow up to what we did last week with the next big thing, or looking at this question of where is technology taking us? Because the rapid acceleration of human progress and human development on planet Earth has led us to begin to question something about our sustainability, whether we can sustain that rapid progress, whether we are creating an artificial form of life called artificial intelligence or beyond that may replace us, whether we are beginning to degrade the planet with human progress to such an extent that we're making our own home that we live on much more unlivable. The question of sustainability is something that you and your children and your grandchildren and all of your descendants, as we head into this third millennium, these 2000s, will be dealing with more and more. And so I want to show you some data today, some very interesting data about the sustainability of human progress. And I'm going to present to you a little bit of a PowerPoint around that, but a PowerPoint sort of in my style. in this class. So I will get to that very shortly, but first, let me make sure that I have everything else dealt with. So I'd like to formally welcome Izzy or Isabel Weir in person to the class. And Izzy, do you want to just grab the microphone and turn it on and get ready to sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, what program you're in, and why you actually signed up for a course about the future, the human future. Please go ahead.
S Hello? Hello?
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So I'm in the welding program. I on I have to take gen eds to actually get my certificate. So I just looked for ones that I found interesting and that would actually hold my attention
Yep.
so I'd be able to complete them.
Sure. Great. And can you give us a sense of why the future matters to you?
That affects us all. It's something that we all have to pay attention to, and especially for future generations, it's
Yeah.
something that just affects us.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything in particular that you really want to understand this semester about our future? Any question, anything that you hope could be answered?
Definitely why we choose the things that we choose, like daily decisions we make in our life and how they affect ourselves and other people,
Yes.
looking not only tomorrow, but 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, you are the one who asked a very profound question about having a child. Is it ethical
Right.
to have a child today? Which was a great question, and I hope that we can actually explore that a little bit more today in the context of sustainability, because I detected in that question some concern around having children today.
Right, definitely with the economic and government and the social state of the world,
Yeah.
you have to be careful with affecting other people.
Absolutely. And so you ask, is it ethical? Which is a great question for anybody to be asking today. So I'm hoping that we can also begin to answer that as well today and even in subsequent classes. What I like is the fact that a student has not only asked that question in the first class, as Izzy did, but now she's here to in person and we can explore it a little bit more. But the questions that you ask as students live really matter. And that's why I encourage you to join the class live or in the Cosmos so that I can find out what you're thinking. And then we can work that into the class. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to the smartboard for a moment because I want to just make a few notes there in terms of reviewing. And before I begin to do the lecture on sustaining it, I just want to make a few notes there. And as I do, Carol, is there anything you would like to add for us as well? Grab a microphone. If you have yours, good. So I'm just going to take the camera over there now, and Carol has the mic. But is there anything you want to bring to our attention today?
Well, I would say mostly that in general term, the functional technology is coming up more quickly than
Yeah.
previously thought to be. Um, eh, I would say mostly that um, I began to realize and understand much better the aspect of the true connection with humanity more than before.
Yes. Yes.
And as I mentioned previously last week in the discussion board,
Yep.
I did that paper when I began to study anthropology. And that time I didn't understand more or less why the connection was. It was more several years later I realized
Hmm.
what was understanding.
Several years later, that's often how knowledge and wisdom comes. You hear something, you learn something, but you may not fully understand it. But later, it starts to sink in.
Makes sense now.
And this is something that's a very good point. Thank you for that. So you can see that today, in terms of who we have in person here already on board, we've got Working Tech. There's me, there's Carol, and of course, there's Izzy. And what I want to do is make sure that we have just a little bit of time to look ahead and also to review. And I can make a few notes, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the lecture. But the lecture will probably be a lot more interactive in the sense that if Izzy or Carol want to be asking any questions during the lecture, they can. They're welcome to do that. And we will see afterwards as well with their questions what they think is important. And just remember that you have your third reflection that you are going to be writing after today's class. Okay, so let me just move this over here for a second, and we will make a little note here in terms of ahead. Okay, so what are we looking at right now that is ahead for all of you? Well, remember that today, of course, is the third class, and ahead is your third reflection. Okay, so third reflection. And I can't tell you how important these reflections are that you're doing after the classes, in between the classes as well. They're worth 14%. Each one that you do, that's 325 to 350 words, as you know, and you're reflecting on the content that was covered in the class. So generally speaking, if you're not receiving 5 out of 5, if you've handed in your reflection on time and there's no issue with AI, if I've marked it down, it's probably because you haven't been integrating enough course content into the reflection, meaning you haven't been referring to the ideas in the class. So can you please make sure in your reflections, the third one and the fourth one that you do, that you're referring to what we cover in the class, including what the students say. Really important what the students bring up. So that is the third reflection. And then what you will be seeing is reflection 4, reflection 5, 6, and 7. Those are the only reflections, the only work that you're doing this semester. The last reflection will be worth 16%. And if you total all of those up, that's worth 100% of your grade. Okay, so make sure you stay on top of the reflections. And always, when we're talking about the reflections, we're talking about one question, and then it's the reason for the question. The reason I'm doing this right now and spending a little bit of time on ahead is because I've noticed that not a lot of students in the class this semester are posting reflections. And I want to just be really clear. I'm concerned increasingly about these students. And I'm concerned that these students are going to fail this course if they're not doing the work. So please take note that I allow one extension for all students during the semester, so I can permit you one extension if there's a reflection you haven't done yet. Just email me and let me know, and I will give you that time to do it. But please be aware that we are now into our third class, and if you haven't done a reflection yet, and you're only doing one after today's class, then you need to email me and let me know what your plan is to make sure you get all the reflections done for the rest of the semester. Okay, so that is what's ahead. And in terms of content, what's coming is a lot of space exploration, a lot of trying to understand what humanity's future is going to be off the planet now that we are going into space more and more. This raises so many fundamental questions about who we are as human beings and where we should be living and what our societies should look like. So please be aware that there's some very important ideas coming around space exploration. Now, in terms of a little bit of review from last week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back for a moment and I'm going to check in with Izzy and see what she's thinking, because I want to always be able to do the reviewing as much as I can with. That's okay. Just make sure you finish swallowing. Eating is okay. Some students come in for lunch when they're live in this class. So are you ready to answer? So Izzy, do you want to give me a sense of last week's class? Because I know you posted reflection on it too, which is great. What would you say is sort of the important content or the takeaway for you from last week?
I'm gonna be really honest. I didn't.
You didn't? Oh, I thought I saw a reflection. Was it the second one, maybe? Or no, I saw the second reflection. Something, or maybe I didn't. Oh, it was another student. I'm having a moment of brain rot. Just my brain is not working, and this is a term that's sometimes used these days. So my memory is not functioning well. Okay, well that's a good, honest answer. I
I
appreciate.
was a bad student last week.
Okay. All right.
admit.
If you have not received an extension yet this semester for anything, then go ahead and post the second reflection
Okay.
in the next 3 or 4 days, at least before next class. That way you'll be able to stay up with your grades. Okay, good. So why don't I then do the review for you, and I'll go back to the board right now just to post, or at least write a couple of important points for all of you. And last week, I held a book up and I said, this is a fascinating book written by a visionary and futurist named Kevin Kelly, who was the co-founder of Wired magazine. And he wrote a book called What Technology Wants. And he talked a lot about the human relationship with technology, and also this idea he explored of how technology itself, the force of technology, may be something so powerful in life on this planet in terms of all creatures using their own tools in some form, whether it's a bird and a stick, whether it's a chimpanzee or a primate and some other kind of item they have picked up, or whether it's the humans that have created such sophisticated tools. This idea of creating tools on this planet may go beyond humans and may be such a powerful force in our story that we have to really ask ourselves then, what does technology want for us? Fascinating question. So remember from last week, it was, oops, I'll just write this. What does technology want? And what does it want for us, the humans? And that was something that I began to answer for you last week. And I'm just going to go back over here and kind of lead into the lecture today that I really want to explore in depth with all of you. What I began to say last week in terms of answering that question about the force of technology in our lives is that I tried to present to you a kind of a new view, something more optimistic that comes from Kevin Kelly, in which he talked about how the proper use of technology can lift our spirits, can elevate our soul. And today, when we talk about technology and the extent of it in our lives, we often have a fairly pessimistic or darker view of where technology is taking us. And today I'm going to be touching on some of that data around more that darker view. However, what Kevin Kelly was saying is that if you select the devices that you want to use in your life, if you recognize that the world today is awash is overwhelmed with many new tools that we can use, whether they're new applications, new software, or new hardware. Tech is embedded in our lives, right down to the classroom setting. If you look at this room right now, for example, look at the amount of tech that is in this space that's allowed me to be able to record this class on YouTube, live stream it on YouTube. Look at Izzy right now. She has her laptop open and she's ready to take notes, but maybe, as happens with a lot of students, maybe she's already getting a little bit bored and she's off in another place online, which is quite common. I'm not going to check, but my point is that technology is everywhere and we use technology all the time. And there can be a view developing that we're becoming slaves to our technology, that our technology is controlling us and not the other way around. Kevin Kelly's view is more optimistic. And his view is that humans always have the power to choose what technology they want to use and what not to use. And he gave in his book an example, and I'm going to end with this today. This is just review, where he talked about how he learned when he was much younger and was not interested in technology at all. But he had a kind of epiphany. He was cutting down trees. He was trying to support himself with that work when he was much younger in the 1970s. And he realized that when he had a chainsaw or some sort of electronic tree cutting device versus the manual labor of cutting down a tree, he realized that if that chainsaw was used well and properly, it would be so smooth and so quick in being able to do the work that would have taken so long manually. And so when he found the right chainsaw and the right electronic tool, and he used it, he felt great afterwards. He felt his spirit lifted. And he began to realize that things that we use, if we use them well, actually open us up and make us appreciate life more. So let me come back finally in terms of this review and bring Izzy back in, because I learned something about Izzy when I was reviewing our class list, and now I've learned a bit more. She is in the welding program. A welder likes tools, right?
Yeah.
So, Izzy, could you give me a little bit of an explanation of what does it feel like when you found a good tool?
It makes my job a lot easier. It makes my life a lot easier. I find things get done quicker.
Yeah. And are there bad tools?
I wouldn't necessarily say that there's bad tools. It's just the application that you're looking for. So maybe the tool might not necessarily be for a specific application.
Yes. And have you ever developed a particular, I wouldn't say relationship, but a feeling, where a bond where there's one tool that you just really love, a couple of tools, and you keep going back to those tools?
Well, there's specific tools that do a majority of what you need them to.
Uh-huh.
So they're daily use or considered versatile.
Yeah, sure. Is there one in particular that you can give a name to it for us?
Welding pliers. They are
Which?
welding pliers.
Welding pliers.
They're a hammer, a pair of pliers, snips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have the welding pliers with you, and if you don't have them with you, what's the difference in your sort of emotional state at that moment when you're trying to complete a task. Would you be able to describe what it's like when you have it and when you don't have it? Go ahead.
When you have them, it's a normal day. You just go about your routine, doing the tasks that you need to do. When you do not have them, you lose your mind basically.
Exactly.
You're asking somebody else if they have a pair. They form they do so many different tasks
Yes.
that you constantly need them. So you just can't complete things without them.
And you can't just pick up those welding pliers and use them. You have to use your intelligence and your critical thinking to know how to use those welding pliers, right?
Yeah.
See, this is the idea that Kevin Kelly is trying to tell us. And he gave that idea in terms of the chainsaw. And it could be even in when you decide when you want to use Instagram or TikTok or any other application, when you're engaging with technology on a daily basis, you have a choice on what you use and what you don't use. And when you use something, in order to use it well, you have to learn how to use it. And if you learn how to use it well, you're going to feel empowered and you're going to feel better. And so that's what he is trying to tell us, which is if only humans can figure out what tools are worth using and what tools are not, and then learn how to use those tools well, i.e. technology, that's what tools are, then our lives will be better and our spirits will be lifted. But a lot of us don't think of it in those terms. We tend to overreact to technology in some way. That's a review. And what I was trying to help you to understand is that when it comes to the next big thing that we humans are going to be facing, the next big new technology in our lives, we need to be using Kevin Kelly's frame of understanding to make sure that we use these technologies well. We don't just use them. Maybe we don't need them, but we need to be intelligent and we need to be critical consumers. And this leads to my big topic today, and that is this new idea that I'm going to show you right now. And I'm just going to tee this up, and I'll just bring it in here, and we'll go back here. And I might be able to even share this with you online so that you can see it full screen. But for now, I'm just going to run it up here, and I will put it right behind me so Izzy and Carol can see it clearly. And then we'll put the astronauts over to my side. There we are. There are the four of them quietly talking to Adrian Arsenault about going to the moon. And what I'd like to zero in on is this idea called sustainability, or sustaining it. And the question I want to ask for us today and really think about is, can we humans sustain this remarkable technological progress on planet Earth? Or are we going to be running into, in the near future, more and more dilemmas, more problems and difficulties that could make life for us more difficult? So this is a different view from last week. I'm moving on from technology, and I'm trying to ask ourselves, can we sustain this remarkable progress? Because the amount of new tools and next big things in our lives is increasing constantly. So I want to start with a person, a visionary, who has helped us to understand something about sustainability. And her name is Rachel Carson. And she wrote a book called Silent Spring in the early 1960s that has become the sort of Bible of the environmental movement. Rachel Carson was a journalist. She also was a scientist. And she also believed that we humans today have to understand something about the environment and what is happening to the environment as a result of our technological progress. And in her book, Silent Spring, that became so foundational when it was published in the 1960s that John F. Kennedy, the American president at the time, actually referred to this in one of his important speeches as being an inspiration for him in beginning to look at the environment in a different way. And essentially, what she said was, we have to be careful that we may be creating silent springs for ourselves. And what does that mean? It means when we don't hear the birds, when we don't hear nature. Imagine spring, imagine trees growing and grass growing, but we can't hear any wildlife. Where are the animals? Where are the creatures? And her view was, as a result of the research that she had done, and I will tell you about that research, her view was that we are entering into a new period on planet Earth, and it's called the Anthropocene era, the human age on planet Earth. And I want to write this down in the notes because it's such an important idea. But here is going to be the next little pressure today for Izzy to see if, how about you going over and making some notes? How is your handwriting? Not too good? So? Okay, so I will do it myself, okay? Not a problem. I'm going to go over for now. I'm not going to take the camera over there. I'm just going to go over and you will see it on the big board here, okay? And I'm going to write a word down for you that is so important, okay? And it's called Anthropocene. Anthropocene. And Anthropocene means, when we break this word down, this means human, anthro. And pocene means change. So the idea that she and others were starting to give us is that humans are causing the change. Okay? So this idea is very important as we move forwards, because in her research, in which she looked at the amount of chemicals that were being created by companies, particularly in the plastics industry and in the waste that they were disposing of, she began to detect through her research that these chemicals, when they were buried in the earth, began to seep into the soil, and the soil became contaminated. And she gave an example that became a kind of a scandal in the United States as well as Canada. The Niagara River is a river that runs from Niagara Falls, as you all know, and it runs into Lake Ontario. Back in the 1960s, the 1970s, there were large American chemical companies that had their plants along the Niagara River, right on the edge. And they had deposited in their barrels that they had buried in the earth some of the waste from the chemicals that they were using to create plastics and other items that people were buying. Things like toothpaste, for example, or asphalt that was being used to create roads, or the plastic bags that are being bought and used increasingly by consumers. In those items are chemicals that don't break down. They're not degradable. These companies that began to deposit the waste from making those things didn't know that, or they might have known it, but they didn't tell the public about it. And as a result, there were companies along the Niagara River, just a second, good, that had buried barrels of this waste in the soil. And eventually, what started to happen is in the towns around, in the American side of the Niagara River, people started to get sick. There were greater cases of cancer. And she began to research this, and she began to look, for example, at the herbicides and insecticides and fertilizers that were being used for agricultural products to help grow those things and make them bigger and make them more abundant. And she began to present research that demonstrated that the products that we are making today, we humans, and the materials that we're using for those products, there are consequences for when we use them, and there are consequences for the waste that we create from them. And if we don't do something about that, we're going to contaminate the atmosphere. We're going to make the atmosphere and make our lives more toxic. And she used this word toxic. In fact, she started to use a word called toxins, that there are toxins around us that have been created by humans. And we have to be careful. And if we're not careful enough, then there will be silent springs. Things will be killed off as a result of these toxins. She was not wrong in terms of a very big historical point that I'd like to make to you. And then I'm going to move on and show you some fascinating data that was done at the end of the 20th century about our impact on the natural world. Once upon a time, around 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, in North America and South America, in the Americas, the American continent, as we call it in the world. Let me just bring this up for you so you can see a map of the world, and you will be able to understand this a little bit more. Okay? So you're looking right over Rachel Carson right now. I've just put this map up, and if you look at the world, we can divide it into the Eastern Hemisphere, which is everything east of the Atlantic Ocean. That would be Africa and Europe and Asia, and all of that goes east. And then everything west of the Atlantic Ocean is the Americas, North America and South America. Well, 15 to 20,000 years ago, when humans were just beginning to arrive in the Americas, we had massive animals here. They were called megafauna. We had woolly mammoth. We had saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths that populated this part of the world. They were all killed by humans. We call that the megafaunal extinction. Megafauna, large animals. And we killed them through our hunting. We killed them through human development. We killed them with the tools that we had developed and the strategic planning that went into being able to put a team of humans together to surround a woolly mammoth and bring it down and cut it up and get the meat and the tusks and all the other things. But eventually all these animals disappeared because of us. Well, what Rachel Carson began to say in the 1960s is that humans are doing the same thing again, but in a different way. Humans have developed new things, new products, new items, new things that we make, and those things affect nature, affect the natural world, and we have to be careful. We're living now increasingly, she said, at a time when humans, not nature, are driving change on this planet. Humans are the ones that are making things different on the planet. And that takes me now to the beginning of some critical data that I want to show you. At the end of the 20th century, when we were beginning to look back at the millennium, a millennium is 1,000 years, and we were thinking about the last 1,000 years, the 1900s, the 1800s, the 1700s, and we were also beginning to look ahead into the next millennium, which is what we're in now, which is, the 2000s, 2100, 2200, 2300. So we were at this sort of crossroads. The millennia were shifting. We were moving from the 1900s and we were going into the 2000s. And you're living at that time where we've shifted from that. We call some of you the millennials for that reason, because you were born in this new millennium. Well, there was a comprehensive scientific report that was done. And what you're looking at right now are just a few of the scientists who were gathered together to create what's called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report. And I'm going to have to write that down in the notes for you, okay, to make sure you really understand this, because the data I'm about to present to you comes from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report, and it is the most comprehensive, scientific, independent report ever done about the impact of human development on planet Earth. Is this making sense? Yeah? Okay. Let me go write something for you, okay? Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report. And this is going to test a little bit my spelling skills, but millennium is MILLENNIUM. So millennium has those two L's and the two N's, okay? Ecosystem, which I will explain in a moment, and then assessment report. And this is a major report. Okay. Now, before I show you this data, and there's some really interesting data, I just want to check. Normally, if I have more students in person, then we'll have a little conversation and I'll ask questions. But is there anything, Izzy, that you want to know at this point? Or does everything feel pretty clear? Please ask if you like.
I just think I would want to know how soon we're actually looking at the Anthropocene happening.
Yes.
And like how accelerated it's going to be.
Well, excellent question. Scientists now believe that we are in it. We've just entered it. The Global Geological Organization that is responsible for officially announcing this shift has not yet officially announced it, but they're getting close. And a lot of research has been done around the world to show the scientists who are part of this organization that we're ready to rename the times in which we live. But the organization is still waiting for just a little bit more evidence, but they're getting very close. And it's likely that in your lifetime, and certainly in your children's lifetime, we will have an announcement from the Global Geologic Society saying, we have now left the Holocene, which was another era, and we are in a completely new period on planet Earth in which the drivers of change on the planet, the reasons there are volcanoes, the reasons there are ice age, the reasons that the tectonic plates move, the reasons that things change on the planet is not a result of nature anymore. It's largely a result of humans messing things up or changing things. And this will be very significant for humanity. But right now, among most scientists, there's an informal understanding that we're kind of in it, but it's coming. And I could even give you a very interesting story, but it's going to take too long to explain. One of the most important pieces of evidence for determining whether we should be entering officially the Anthropocene, actually exists close to here in a place called Rattlesnake Point in Halton Hills. And there's a lake there that has become very important for researchers around the world. And I can tell you more about that some other time, but just know that the evidence is popping up in different parts of the world where scientists are seeing things happen in the natural world that show irreversible evidence that humans are changing things, not nature. Probably the best answer I can give at this point is climate change is just one example of that. That's tip of the iceberg. And that's definitely human caused.
Right. When they announce this, do you think it will affect the doomsday clock? Or do you think the doomsday clock will have...
It's a very good question. I don't know. Probably, but the doomsday clock is also connected to the use of weapons of mass destruction and the use of atomic weaponry as well. However, I would actually put to you as a great reflection for your third reflection to explain what exactly are the criteria that the doomsday clock uses and what is the doomsday clock exactly. And that would be great for the students to read as well.
Okay.
All right, but it also is tied to nuclear, the amount of waste in the atmosphere that comes from the testing of nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons. At any rate, here's the data. The really important data that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment gave us at the end of the 20th century. And for those of you who are not entirely convinced yet that climate change, for example, is caused by humans and not by nature, then you may find yourself reconsidering that view after you've seen some good data. Also, please keep in mind that when we talk about climate change, we have to remember that climate change is natural. Nature changes the climate all the time. What's different now, and what we have proof of, is humans are accelerating, are speeding up natural things. That's what's different. And you're going to see this in the data. So first, the most important kind of graph that you can look at right now to understand something is this. This is the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, trying to show us what's called the world GDP. And I will explain this so you can understand clearly. But what you see behind me is a graph, and on the vertical side of the graph, we see world gross domestic product in trillions of dollars. GDP is a term we use in economics to explain goods and services, things that humans create, whether they're the things that we use or the things that we do. Humans create stuff, and that's called GDP, gross domestic product. On the horizontal plane are the years. So what this graph shows is that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment team was trying to show how much stuff have humans been producing over the years. And we can see, if we go back to the year 500 AD, 700 AD, 1100 AD, 1300, we can see that humans were producing about $1 trillion or less of stuff. And that could be anything from the wheels that were being used for horse-drawn carriages, the material that was being used for people's homes, the plates that people were using to eat from, any good that humans were using, or it could have been the services that were being provided. The grocery store that was selling the fruit and vegetables. That person was providing a service. He was being paid to provide that service. That's called a service. Or a person who was driving a bus. He is driving, and that is a service. Goods and services humans were providing. If you look at this from 500 AD up into 1900, there's virtually no rise in the amount of things that humans are making or producing. And then the 20th century came along, 1900. And this is where there's a huge rise in what humans are making and producing, largely technology. 1 trillion in 1900, 10 trillion in 1967, 52 trillion in 2003, and the number just keeps going up. In other words, this is a remarkable piece of information. Humans on planet Earth, starting in the 20th century, largely began to produce an enormous amount of stuff. And most of that was new technology. I want you to just think about this for a moment, because this is going to have an impact on everything I'm about to show you in terms of the data of these scientists. There were about 800 of these scientists from different fields who were studying the data of what humans were making and what they were actually doing in their societies, whether it was the Roman world, after the Roman world fell, and then the European world grew, and there was ancient China and ancient India, and then there was Europe began to grow even more, and there was the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom came over to the United States, and that was formed, and Canada was formed, and all of these societies and civilizations were producing new things and new technologies. But it was in that 20th century where we humans began to understand so much more, and we began to create so many more things. Well, here is what we began to see as a consequence of this development. First, the wood that was being used to create the paper that we were writing on more had to come from somewhere. The coal that had to be brought out of the planet, or the oil that would be used to drive our new machines, our internal combustion engine, where would that come from? Well, that would come from nature. And we began to see that the agricultural development as well that was being done to provide more food for growing population of human civilization. Well, all of this began to result in habitat loss. We began to see that in our forests of the world, we started to see fewer trees, and we started to see our grasslands beginning to retreat. We even started to see our waterways becoming more contaminated. And the result was that we began to see that this development is having an impact on the environment. Here's a very important piece of data that really tells you something about how our burning of fossil fuels was beginning to affect the environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enlarge this for a moment so you can see this full screen. And I can do this quite easily. Just give me a moment. Here we go. So now you should see this graph that was done by the scientific team. And let's take a close look at this, okay? We see on the horizontal plane the years. We see on the vertical plane the parts per million of carbon dioxide, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And notice that in 1954 and just afterwards, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere starts to rise quite dramatically and continues on into the 21st century. Parts per million of carbon dioxide around the world. And this is a direct result of the technology that we are using now to drive our machines, like automobiles, like airplanes, like buses. Any machine that has an internal combustion engine that needs oil in it, to run that engine, produces, by the burning of that oil, more carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere. And it's not in any way a coincidence that after 1945, at the end of the Second World War, into the 1950s, we saw in the world an enormous growth in technological development, and the number of cars or automobiles on the planet began to also grow with that. And it was a dream for many, particularly in the United States, the biggest economy at the time, to own your own car. But the result was that with more cars and more machines that are burning oil, we see the carbon dioxide growing more and more in the atmosphere. And let me just explain what that means, and I will come back here. Just so you all understand, because I know that this can be quite abstract, but it's very important that you understand this. And I try as best I can when I explain this kind of data to explain it to you in the most clear and concrete way. Climate change is a result largely of more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Well, what does that mean? Let's just make sure it's very clear. I've just shown you a chart that was produced by an excellent global scientific team of scholars. So this is good information. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not something that has been pushed out on social media. It's not something on TikTok or something. It's something much deeper. These are people thinking very, very deeply about what's happening to the planet. So I'm trying to tell you that you can trust this information. The reason I say that is because a lot of you today don't trust information or are suspicious of what you see, and rightly so. There's a lot of fake stuff, but there's also a lot of good stuff, and you need to know where the good stuff is. This is good stuff. So we know for a fact that there is a much greater amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today than there has been in the past. And what happens when there is all of this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Well, it has an impact. Carbon dioxide is natural. We breathe in oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a natural chemical in life. But what we humans have done is we put more of it in the atmosphere than nature has done. And because there's more of it, it's staying in the atmosphere. It's not going anywhere. Normally, if there was the proper amount of carbon dioxide, it would be dispersed. It's not being dispersed. It's sitting above us. And it's also not allowing the heat from the sun that is reflected off the sun back into the atmosphere. That's how it works. The sun gives us our energy, gives us our heat. It also warms the planet. But then that warmth is then reflected back and that energy goes back into the atmosphere. Well, what happens when there's too much carbon dioxide is that the heat from the planet, when it goes back into the atmosphere, it doesn't have a chance to go anywhere. It gets trapped in that carbon dioxide. That's called the greenhouse effect or the hothouse effect. Does it make sense? You need to understand this because that's exactly what climate change is. The world is warming because we humans put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as a result of our technologies. So let me just come back and show you something about this new development when we talk about the growth. And I'll go a little more quickly now, and then we'll stop. I mentioned to you that we're warming up. The planet is getting warmer. And actually, I can show you the data. This is the Millennium Ecosystem Assessments calculations, looking back all the way to 1860 up into the year 2000. And they've looked at the global surface temperature every year from 1860 up until the 21st century. And if you look at this graph, you will see, and I could share this again, I'm just trying a little something new today with this, and I can actually do it this way. Yeah. There you see it, close up for everyone, and we can see it here. Excellent, Izzy can see it too. There's a blue line, 0 degrees Celsius, just near the bottom. And if you look at how this is broken down from 1860 to 2000, you can see that the surface temperature of the planet has been gradually increasing. From 1860 until 1920, some years it would go up, some years it would go down, up and down. There was some volatility. But then, after about 1920, we see it going constantly up and up and up. That means that the surface temperature of planet Earth has been warming increasingly over these years, caused by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we know that our technologies and the use of these technologies is having an impact. And it may be that we might find a new form of energy, that instead of burning fossil fuels, we might be able to harness the power of the sun through nuclear fusion. And as a result, we won't need to burn fossil fuels. We will have clean energy. But we're far away from doing that right now. And so we have to really be thinking about these impacts. The other thing we are seeing as a result of climate change is not just the warming, but the volatility in the weather patterns. And we see this here, for example, in the flood events per decades, 1950s, 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We see a gradual rise in the amount of volatile weather that results in flooding. Sometimes it's wildfires, sometimes it's tsunamis. But just to give you an idea of how common flooding is now, whether it's in another part of the world where there have been mudslides or some kind of disaster that has led to catastrophic flooding that has wiped away entire towns or villages. But just yesterday, I went to get my blood taken at a Life Lab in Toronto, and there was a sign on the door that said, "Come back in 2 days, we're cleaning up from a flood." It's just a small example, and it may not even be related to anything that I'm talking about. But the fact is that we are becoming more aware now of unusual things happening in our climate and in our weather. And even today, when we woke up here in Oshawa, in Canada, it was something like 8 or 9 degrees. but by the end of today, it will be 25 degrees or maybe even 30 degrees. When I was growing up 40 years ago, I did not see this kind of wild swinging of weather patterns. But that's normal now as a result of climate change. We see the warming and we see the volatility, and we see more catastrophic events. I'm going to stop for a moment on this remarkable breakdown of the data. And I want to go through each of these little squares with you to show you what we now know about what's happening as a result of our rapid technological growth. And so here we go. Let's take a look at this. And what I'd like is for Izzy to come up to the podium at least, and we'll do this together, okay? Izzy, can you walk up and at least I'm going to have you read something out for everybody, okay? And then we will carry on together. But I want you to hold this and look at this, okay? Because this is what everybody sees online. And I'd like you to just read to me this entire graph. Just read out what you see, okay? Just go ahead. Just read it slowly.
It says the great acceleration,
Yes.
the socioeconomic trends, and the Earth system trends.
Okay, and then could you read underneath? What does it say about socioeconomic trends?
For the socioeconomic trends, it says world population, real GDP, foreign direct investments, urban population, primary energy use, fertilizer consumption, large dams, water use, paper production, transportation, telecommunication, and international tourism.
Excellent. Okay, so those are developments that have been happening since essentially the end of the Second World War. And we call this, Izzy, a period of great acceleration in technological development. Okay? Well, what about the Earth system trends? Could you read those Earth system trends? Just what you see there. Go ahead.
For Earth system trends, it says carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane,
Stratospheric ozone. Good. Okay.
surface
Temperature.
temperature, ocean acidification,
Yep.
marine fish capture, shrimp agriculture, coastal nitrogen, tropical forest loss, domesticated land, and terrestrial biosphere
Degradation. Okay. Keep saying, okay, stay up there for a second. Now, in all of this, as you look at this, Izzy, what do you notice about the graphs and a trend? Would you be able to point that out to us?
that it is drastically increased.
And when would you say that there's been this increase in all of these things? Whereabouts does it start? Go. Yeah, you can read from there. Yeah, 1958. Let's make sure that we have it here. It might be, I have to get, because usually I go with 19. When we talk about the great acceleration, we usually say 1950. Yeah, it's hard to actually see completely, but it's about 1950, okay? You might be seeing the 0 and it looks like an 8. It's almost impossible to read. I can't even read it with my glasses. Okay, you can't? Okay, great. All right, you can go back to take it. Thanks, Izzy. Excellent. So Izzy has pointed something out to all of us as we look at this, and that is since 1950, there has been a dramatic increase, not just during the 20th century, but during the second half of the 20th century. We saw an increase in so many developments around technology, transportation, paper production, the building of large dams, telecommunications, fertilizer consumption. That's something Rachel Carson would have really narrowed in on. Real GDP, that's the gross domestic product again that I showed you the slide of earlier. How about world population? How is that related to technology? Well, hygiene, medical science. Do you know that the world's population, here is a stunning fact, from the beginning of the 20th century up into the present, the world's population has increased about 6 billion. It was about 2 billion in 1900. We're now at 8 billion. Do you know how long it took humanity to reach 2 billion? Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But then we started to hit, because of the development of medical science, better medicine, because of better hygiene. People were living longer. How about vaccines? That's technology. How about something as simple as aspirin or Tylenol that you would take? That is also technology. That led to people living longer and not dying as much in infant state. So the mortality of humans was declining and was rising, and infant mortality was declining. And that meant that we saw our population increasing dramatically. All of these things bring us back to the central idea that I was trying to explain at the beginning of today's lecture. And I want to just conclude there and bring back the PowerPoint while I try to do too many things at once. And there we see the great acceleration. There's an undeniable fact. We humans love our progress. We believe that we are progressing and that life is getting better. And in many ways, that's true. World literacy has been rising steadily. People are becoming more educated. People are generally living longer. It's not unusual, particularly in developed parts of the world, for people to be living into their hundreds and even beyond. The idea of a centenarian, a person living to 100, is now not uncommon. We live at a time when we have so many new tools and technologies that seem to make our lives easier. And we generally say that this is progress. We say that we have more human rights. We have more understanding of democracy. Our governments today are based more on the idea of rule of law, in which representatives are elected by the people, not dynasties or families of kings and queens and emperors who remain in power decade and century after century, ruling with an iron fist through authoritarian regimes. We become more free in many ways. And yet, we have to ask ourselves, what's the cost? Well, I'm going to end with a term for you today that some of you may never have heard before. And it's called the paradox of progress. The paradox of progress. And there's a term that has been given to us by a very important world historian named William McNeill, who wrote a book in the 20th century called The Rise of the West, A History of the Human Community. And also he's written extensively on the development of the World Wide Web. His son is also a world historian, John McNeill, who's written extensively on environmental history. And he said, part of the problem with humans is we don't understand what progress means. So I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to write this down for you, and then I'm going to have a little discussion with Izzy at the podium together, and we're going to just explore this thought called, what is progress? What is progress? And the term I want you to think about is paradox of progress or progress. Okay? Paradox of progress. So, Izzy, come on back to the podium, okay? And then this will be the last of your exercise for our class today. And I'm going to bring Izzy back, and we're going to have a little chat, okay? So, you will understand what paradox of progress means in a moment. First, what do you think progress means for humanity? And you can talk about yourself as well, but try to think of it in a bigger way, okay? What is progress for humanity as a whole?
I would say it's continuing to achieve our goals and moving towards something.
Huh.
You have to have a set
Yes.
benchmark.
And what might that benchmark be? What are we moving towards?
I would say currently it's the exploration of our solar system and trying to find a new planet to live on.
Ah, why would we want to live on a new planet?
Because we ruined this one.
Okay, here we go. See, this always comes up eventually in any class. Okay, students can be quite pessimistic about what we humans have done. But how would that be progress, Izzy, if we begin to build a new society somewhere else and we haven't really dealt with the problems that led to the ruin here? Wouldn't we just ruin things there?
Well, as a society, we would learn from our mistakes necessarily and
Hmm.
try not to make them in the future. But also, instead of just having like global communications, we would have like, I don't even know what you call it. Like, it would be solar systems communicating,
Yes.
or planets communicating.
Sure. And um, what would we be talking about when we communicate?
Issues, I guess, we would have to talk about a lot about governments
Yes.
and social programs and working towards new technology, especially since this planet may not react the same way as ours does.
That's true. That's true. Okay. I'm going to just say this for the sake of discussion to be constructive, and also because I think that your view is probably quite common among a lot of students. But I'm going to say, just for the sake of this, I think your idea of progress is wrong. Just for the sake of giving you a different way of looking at it. Because a lot of what we do in this class is about perspective and trying to shift your perspective or open your perspective. But I'm going to say to you that I don't think you understand fully what progress is, okay? And here's my answer. The paradox of progress is something that kind of helps us to understand progress more than the idea that progress is always about things getting better. Progress is always about going to something in the future that's going to be better. Progress is actually about dealing with the here and now and understanding that there's a paradox in progress. What do you think that means when I say there is a paradox in progress?
Well, usually when there's a paradox, there's an issue or like a discontinuity.
Yes, there's something that is not quite aligning with that idea. And when we talk about a paradox, we talk about also something that doesn't fit. Well, here's what William McNeill said. He basically said that progress is like a double-edged sword. That's what the paradox is. That when you develop a new thing, there's always going to be something with it that's going to create a new problem. You can't get away from that. So, for example, when we talk about the development of artificial intelligence, it seems like it can be an amazing tool for us to be able to find information, organize information, but it also creates a new problem, which is we rely on it and it begins to diminish our own critical thinking because the machine is doing something for us. When we talk about anything new in our lives, generally speaking, it's also going to create a new responsibility, a new problem that we may have to deal with. And so we have to be able to look at progress as not something in which things are always getting better. They are, but there's also new problems that arise at the same time. And we have to be able to deal with those problems. And so maybe progress has to be redefined. And we have to recognize that progress always means that we have responsibility to deal with the problems that progress creates. We can't get away from the problems, ever. And so this is something that if you can begin to think about in terms of human development, we will begin to understand that what we need to do in order to keep progressing is not try to get away from our problems, but to recognize that our problems are getting bigger. And maybe we have to get smarter. And he gives an example, for example, that's very, very important. When we think of the development of the automobile, he gave this example. In the early part of the 20th century, in most cities, places where there was human society of thousands of people, horse-drawn carriages with little buggies were the way that people would get around. And then we humans began to discover how with wheels and with an internal combustion engine, we could actually create this new kind of new thing in which we would be able to move around. We wouldn't need horsepower anymore. We would have the power that is made from our fuel and from our engines, and we would have an automobile. You know, there were a lot of people then, in the early days, who were afraid of cars.
No, I did not know.
It's a remarkable, if you look at, they thought that the more cars there would be on roads instead of horses, the more collisions there will be. There were more accidents. That horses driven by a human can stop quickly, or a horse knows where it is, but a car could cause a lot of damage. A car can be in an accident, and it also has a lot of pollution from it, and this is a danger. This was the but yet the car still was developed because we wanted the car. It gave us so much convenience, but yet there were in time problems with cars. There were accidents, there was pollution, but we didn't care at that time. What we cared about was the new big thing, the car. Get lots of cars on the road. But now, today, we have to deal with the consequences. Maybe if we dealt with the consequences earlier of this new big thing, our progress would not have come with so many problems. And maybe you wouldn't want to be leaving the planet. And maybe you wouldn't be asking the question, should I have children or not?
Right.
If we'd been smarter at the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what he's trying to say about the para. The new big thing is going to create new problems. If we don't deal with those problems early on, they will grow and become really big problems. So humanity gets smart. Progress does not mean the elimination of our problems. Progress means new problems, but let's deal with those problems faster. Then we can progress a little bit better. That's the idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say to that? To this, for being such a gracious participant today by engaging not easy conversations. But is there anything you want to add as we conclude?
I had a theoretical come up that
Yes.
I had a discussion with one of my coworkers, and they wanted me to ask you about this theoretical.
Go ahead. What's the theoretical? I love good questions from students. Okay.
So it's been on the internet. There's two buttons, a red button and a blue button.
Red button, a blue button.
If
Okay.
you press the red button, you're safe. But if anyone presses the blue button, 50% of the population have to press the blue button for everyone to be safe.
Okay. 50% have to press the blue, but if I press the red, okay, keep going. So,
So, like, if you press the red button, you yourself are safe, and anyone that presses the red button is safe. But if you press the blue button, 50% of our population has to press the blue button for everyone to be safe.
okay. So what button to press?
So we were having a discussion basically about people who can't help themselves or who wouldn't be able to actively participate properly.
Yes.
And my coworker was of the opinion that if it's just people who are like have proper literacy or understanding or who are of sound mind and all that,
Yes.
they would press the red button.
Yes.
But I brought in that if it's everyone, then you have to press the blue button because there are people who can't necessarily think for themselves or understand. And
Sure.
my coworker brought up the fact that if nobody pressed the blue button, then there's no problem. The
Yes.
problem only starts until someone presses the blue button.
Well, I actually think, and I like this, I actually think the problem is that our choices, I'm going to even go back further and say, why are we presenting ourselves with such stark choices of one button or the other? When I'm presented with that kind of choice, I'm immediately going to be suspicious because I think that here's what we don't understand, or we should understand. We're dealing with so much complexity today in the world. The choices that we face in the global interconnected society that we live in have so many parts to them. When we get on an airplane, if we actually think about an airplane and just how many parts are in it to make it fly well, hundreds of parts, it's complex. So I would rather be presented with choices so that I can deal with the complexity of the world as it is and not simplify it into one or the other. That's too binary for me. Binary meaning one or the other. You know, you press this, you press that. It also sounds a bit like the Matrix. I was watching do you know the Matrix, the movie The
know the
Matrix? You
Matrix.
take the one pill or the other, you know, and I like that. It's dramatically, it's entertaining when you have that dramatic choice. But the truth is that the world that we live in is so complicated that we need to be training our minds to be dealing with complicated choices. And so I wouldn't touch any of those. I would turn my head and go, this is based on a false premise of how reality really works.
I just thought that it brought up good discussions about our choices as individuals, whether we're selfish or caring of others.
Yes.
And me and my coworker actually had a really good discussion at work about this. But it was something that was on the internet, like somebody posted it on a social media platform. And
Yes.
it gained attention.
And what was the conclusion? What were most people picking, and what was the significance of that choice?
So I would say it was really split. Um, around like it was very, very split. People on the internet
Yeah,
don't all have the same opinions.
for sure.
And obviously it's not going to be people who are scholars and all that kind of stuff. It
Yep.
was mostly just teenagers who use the internet.
Uh-huh.
I would say that a lot of people were selfish. I think that the red button would be selfish. I think that picking a button just to save yourself is
For sure.
selfish in either situation.
Well, I think that we might want to conclude by something that I can think of that is positive. Because I definitely think that what you're putting your finger on, Izzy, is something selfish in the human being that we have to be careful and wary of. That the more self-focused we are, and the more and the less we think of others, the darker our future might be. But I'm going to give you something positive. There was a very interesting incident that took place yesterday or the day before, another mass shooting in the United States. Are you aware in, I think it was San Diego, just yesterday, the day before, two young people, two teenagers, went into a mosque and opened fire and killed 3 people. There were many, many children in the mosque at that time. None of them were hit. They were all evacuated, but the 3 who died were the security officials. And they're being hailed as heroes. Now, what we know is that there was one person, one security guard, who was a father of 8. And he's being hailed as the biggest hero because apparently what he did was he distracted the 2 teenagers who came in ready to fire. I don't know exactly what he did, but he distracted them enough that the children could be taken away, evacuated, and there were like 40 or 50 of them. You could see the news as they're being taken out, while the incident is going on. And the 2 teenagers killed the guard. They then, realizing that they couldn't do anything more because the police had already come, they came very quickly, they tried to hide. They couldn't. They then went into a van, and the van was found not long later with the 2 of them dead. They had taken their lives. That security guard apparently knew exactly what he was doing. He distracted them. He put his life on the line at that point. Did he know he was going to be killed? Perhaps. But he saved all those children, apparently. And maybe that is some example of humanity at its best. And it's important to remember that as selfish as we can be, we can also be very selfless. And it's hard to keep those 2 things in mind. It's hard to keep the paradox of progress in mind, too, the good and the bad. But we have to be able to. It's complicated. It's complicated stuff. It's not one or the other, is he? But the more we can concentrate on the good while recognizing that the bad is still there, in time, it will get better. Maybe, okay? And maybe we'll see you with a kid or 2 in 10 years. We will see. Okay, so everybody, let's clap for Izzy. Thank you, Izzy, very much. We're finished. Okay, Izzy has definitely earned her participation bonus today. Okay, so I'm going to say to Izzy that your discussion post for week 3 has been done. You just earned your 5 out of 5 today, okay? You showed up and you participated. And for those of you watching, if you want your participation marks, come to the live class, participate, and that's what's going to happen. You will be rewarded. But you're welcome to write something if you like. It would be for the other students, but you don't have to, okay? 5 out of 5 this week. And for everybody else, there's a few notes for you that will be posted. You have your 3rd reflection to do. Thank you, Carol, for assisting as always, and I'll see you next week. Take care. We are done, and I will save this. And that's here. Where do you work, by the way? Where is your job? Okay, so your coworker there, yeah. good. Yeah, sure.